And they were like, look, somebody with your type of skill sets and testing and knowledge base, you should go to Wall Street. That's how you make money. And I was like, okay, that's what I'll do. Like, if I'm not going to be an athlete and that's the place to get rich, then I'm going to do that. The human body is the vehicle that you have to take yourself through life, no matter what the fuck you're doing. How do I take care of it? When it's in pain, what do I do? If I want to make it do X, how do I help that happen? How do you build a lasting culture in a CrossFit industry that is solely focused on who's winning the CrossFit games? Fuck that. I want sponsors that believe in what we do as a coaching organization and believe in our mission and don't just want to rub elbows with us because we're the cool kids in town. You have to play some sort of statistical game to say like, all right, well, if you want to be top 5 and these are kind of what the tests have been at this level, then you got to be really fucking good at these tests. I am programming to help people get better at absorbing and performing in a crazy, unknown, chaotic test that really has very limited scientific and supported structure that goes behind it. Stand for something more than that with your athletes. Help them with longevity. Help them craft ways that the things they're learning in the sport are helping them for their life outside of it.
Welcome to this new episode. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor for the podcast, Moxy Monitor. For those who don't know about the Moxy Monitor yet, it's a NIRS device that measures muscle oxygen saturation and blood volume in real time. It's a non-invasive sensor that is placed on the skin and can be worn during any training or sporting activity. Motocross riders and climbers wear it on their forearms, hockey players on the ice, swimmers can wear it in the water. I've used it to test rugby players, CrossFit athletes, endurance athletes, and more. The Moxy allows you to individualize work and rest periods, optimize load, reps, and sets, identify training thresholds in real time, and even correct movements based on what the data is showing you. You can also use the Moxy Monitor to determine an athlete's energetic limiting factor and their individual training zones. Using this process, you can better target the athlete's limiter with precision in order to improve their programming, training, and in turn, their performance. You can view and collect the data on your Garmin watch, and you can also pair the Moxy with other physiological testing products such as the VO2 Master, Pnoe, and Cosmet VO2 systems. The Moxy is a tool I've used weekly for over a year now with great success, and I highly recommend it to any coach who's interested in digging a little bit deeper on the physiological side of health, fitness, or performance. You can use the coupon code UPSIDE at checkout for a 5% discount on moxymonitor.com/shop. That's UPSIDE for a 5% discount. With that said, let's get into the show. All right, Max, we're live on the podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm good, my friend. Thank you for having me.
It's great. Like we were saying off air just before, I've been chasing you, so to speak, for quite some time, probably at least a year. I think I remember January last year we were talking about doing a podcast, so I'm glad we can finally make it happen.
Yeah, I'm glad as well. And I think this could be inspiring for other people because I'm notorious for being like, yeah, I'll try to do that podcast. And then the time gets closer and I'm like, fuck, I'm so far behind on my work. I can't do this right now.
I
But
also
this was scheduled way in advance.
We did. That was a month and a bit, almost a month and a half in advance. But I'm going to say I greatly respect your discipline with scheduling for yourself, because I find that it's something that I have a hard time doing. I mean, my wife helps me regulate my schedule because I can't fucking do it. I would work day in and day out if I could. So we actually sat down during the holidays and we wrote down what days I was working or what days I was not, so that it was clear. So that there was no, oh, but I didn't know, but no, I have to do something. So I can totally appreciate the fact that you have things to do, you have priorities, and you set them straight, and then you do what you got to do. So props to you for that, man. For the three people that are listening that don't know who you are, could you tell us a couple things about yourself, please?
Yeah, so I started training Think Tank, which is probably how most people know me. Prior to that, I did some sports performance research for OPT, which is now the OPEX organization in CrossFit. And I've basically been coaching elite level CrossFitters, some people earlier in my career in MMA and field sports. But really over the years, I think my position in the space has become an educator, program designer, business builder / mentor in the CrossFit sports and performance world.
Are you, Max, are you on a laptop right now?
Yes.
Could you tilt the screen down just a smidge so your face is right in the middle?
Good.
A little bit the other way, so you're right in the middle. Yeah, that's perfect. I just don't want
Yeah.
my squares to
You
cut
don't
your.
want to just get my big forehead.
Yeah, I put my logo on
Yeah.
your forehead. It's not going to look great. Saying that because of the logo, of course. I want to actually. I got to know you, or I first found you on the Barbell Shrug podcast in
Oh yeah.
2013. So
Yes.
you were still with OPT. It was still called OPT. It wasn't OPEX yet. And so that was it. I've been kind of following you since then, sometimes closely, sometimes a little more loosely. But I wanted to maybe dig into your story before CrossFit, because a lot of people, I mean, more people know you now than obviously they did before, as things
Yeah.
usually go, or hopefully go.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about the Max before CrossFit.
Yeah. So I grew up in New York. My father was into martial arts and judo specifically, and he's Egyptian. So he kind of got me into soccer and judo as a really young kid. And that transitioned as I started growing and getting bigger. They were like, this guy's too big to play soccer. We're going to move him and play football. And he's too violent for judo. We're going to move him into youth wrestling. And those kind of became like my sports growing up. And I took them through. I went to a Division I school to do both. I played one season of football and then kind of broke down in that first season of wrestling. And just like, I think a lot of athletes, they go through that period of time where they've contributed so much to it. And like, you know, I had broken my ankle and got knee surgery and got shoulder surgery and broke my wrist and had multiple concussions. And I think I had it was almost like somebody at the professional level in terms of the amount of beating up my body was taking, but I wasn't really in love with it anymore, because it was like, man, am I really going to do this to try to like, you know, maybe become a Division I AA, like all conference player? Like that reward didn't really seem like it was going to stoke my fire for life. So I took a break from sports and kind of became a heavy academic, studied business in school, but never really.
What drew you to business?
Social pressure. I grew up in New York and I was good with numbers. Like I always tested pretty well in math, and I always was a pretty analytical person. And they were like, look, somebody with your type of skill sets and testing and knowledge base, you should go to Wall Street. That's how you make money. Like, and I was like, okay, that's what I'll do. Like, if I'm not going to be an athlete and that's the place to get rich, then I'm going to do that. So I went through business school, and I came out during the credit crisis. So I ended up kind of meandering my way to working for this guy that was worth like $500 million, just learning the ins and outs of entrepreneurship. But I really hated it. You know, I hated the lifestyle. I wear t-shirts and stuff like this all the time. I don't like putting on suits. I don't like corporate hierarchies. I don't like that if you're a young person and you have a good idea, you can't share it because you don't have experience yet. So there were a lot of things that I was like, I'm just never going to thrive here. So I started taking all my money, moving that into understanding sports performance. Like I was going and taking FDN courses and going and doing functional medicine and hiring bodybuilding coaches. I hired speed and change of direction coaches. I started doing MMA. Like I just did the things that I really loved to do. Through the MMA route, that kind of brought me into the CrossFit space. And then in the CrossFit space, the competitive bug hit. And I was like, oh, I fucking love this. And I was a little, you know, as a younger man, I was a little sicker and twisted. And I think I had a desire to fight with the pain, like get as much pain as I can in this system and then go to fucking war with it to see if I can win. Now I think of training in a little bit of a different way, but that's who I was. So I competed in 2010 as a regional athlete. 2010, I went to the games as a team, and I think we finished like somewhere just in the top 20. And I really liked that experience, but I think I naturally was more self-oriented as an athlete because I was obsessive. And it's hard to be obsessive and on a team of people that are doing it recreational. And that's kind of how things were back then. So the next year I went to regionals as an individual. I finished about the same. Like I got cut back then when like right before the final day. So maybe like between 15 and 18. And I just realized like, okay, I understand how to train for this thing in a decent way, but I'm a 235 pound guy and doing box jumps and burpees and running and all of this stuff, like the likelihood that me in my mid 20s that I'm going to develop that skill set to be competitive with somebody like Rich Froning, who's at the time looked like he was 190, who's almost just as strong as me. And like, there's not going to be a future for me as an athlete. So that's when I kind of transitioned into full-time coaching and started trying to help people get to the next level. James was working with me in a coaching capacity, and I think had identified me as somebody who could be helpful to their research process. And I was curious and obsessive. So we started working together, and that brings you up to kind of where my earlier story ended, if that's enough back history.
That's great, man. How was your experience working alongside James? I guess with him as a coach, and then with him as a I don't know, what would you call the relationship that you guys had?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that at the time, I think we were close friends. I mean, you never really know if you're hanging out with somebody, especially if they're employing you, if that feeling of friendship is like, it's something that they're doing just because they're paying you and you're a value asset to their business, or if it's authentic. But at the time, he moved down from Calgary, and it was really just in that office that we had there where the gym was set up. It was pretty much me, him, and then Natalie for probably a good year and a half. So we developed a really deep working relationship, and a good challenge process, and we researched things together, and I asked questions, and we would do workouts together. And I think it was like a good miniature brotherhood that kind of got developed for that period of time. In terms of it ending, I don't think it was as cordial of an ending process. And I think there was just there's almost just like some people feel like they need to be in a leadership position. And if you're in a leadership position, even if you're working for an organization that has a hierarchy, there's a certain subset of ideologies and philosophies that you're willing to be led on. And I feel like I've always kind of considered myself as wanting to be some sort of a leader in a corporate structure, whether that means I could build my own teams or have autonomy to do things. And I just don't think that side of me was fully cultivated in that organization. And I perceived that it wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. So we just kind of broke apart. And I think I learned a good deal of some of the academic training theory stuff that kind of has come down from Czech and Poliquin, that has kind of turned into his curriculum over time. And then took things that I didn't really like and tried to embed them into the philosophy of how I'm building my own organization. So I'd say it's amicable, but I think our friendship has fizzled, and it's not like I keep in touch with him over the years.
Why did you create TTT? I guess that kind of answers what you were just talking about here, but what was your intention, your vision, your goals when you started on that part of your journey?
Yeah, so a think tank is basically, it's very common in politics and economics, where basically, like, let's say a crisis situation hits, they call in all the best people that they could think of to try to solve a specific problem. So like in the credit crisis, they might call all the investment bankers, all the board of directors, and they'll put together this think tank of people that try to solve that problem to make sure that whatever the catastrophe doesn't happen as bad as it could happen. So I kind of love that concept all the time. Like, I love getting the idea of really smart people together, but to talk about sports and to talk about human health and human disease, and to talk about why the fact that, like, if you just look at our society, and even when I was a little kid, I remember I was testing like off the charts in math and like science, and they were like sending me to special schools and doing all this stuff. And I remember telling one of my friends that I wanted to be a high school football coach when I was young. And later on, like maybe a week or two later, he was like, it was one of the best moments in my life when you told me you wanted that, because somebody with your ambition that doesn't want to do something with their life makes it easier for people like me to live. And like, that was like a fucking heart-based moment, but it's real, because that's what people think about as coaching. They think like, oh, well, you couldn't have solved some global warming, or you couldn't have figured out how to program. You just went into this because, it is what it is. And I had a big problem with that because I thought like the human body is the vehicle that you have to take yourself through life, no matter what the fuck you're doing, whether you're an artist, a dancer, an athlete. So to me, it's always been this thing that I've almost been overly obsessed about. How do I take care of it? When it's in pain, what do I do? If I want to make it do X, how do I help that happen? And so that drew me to athletics, and it drew me to wanting to help people. So the moral philosophy was built on basically three pillars. One is I wanted to try to make coaching a profession that was really respected in the industries, which I think I'm still working on. I think most people even look at me and be like, oh, he's a strength coach. And I'm like, just waiting. I'm like, okay, just a couple more years of development. And I can say, go fuck yourself. Two is that I wanted athletes, people that consider them athletes, like, hey, I want to be a world-class athlete, or they just identify as being an athlete, like they're into their bodies. I wanted them to be able to get good advice, because I hired a lot of so-called experts in the field in my earlier years and paid thousands of dollars. Like I literally would work jobs through college and spend all of my money on continuing education to help myself lean out or whatever it was. And like body composition experts that are out there that are taking these huge drug packages and they're taking tests and thyroid and they're photoshopping their images and then they're selling 30-day programs to look like that, is to me it's one of the things that's eroding the quality of physical health in our humanity. Like people think that imagery is realistic, and then they look at themselves and don't see that, and then they think they're pieces of shit and shame, and they're like, that is causing part of the issue that we're dealing with. So fixing kind of the athletic body composition and just getting good advice to people who care about their bodies. And then the last was trying to figure out like how to deal with the public health sector, because I thought personal trainers were really like at the forefront for helping people make healthy on a proactive level. Mm-hmm. You go to the doctor reactively, like,
when there's a problem.
Yeah, I'm sick. But if you're doing all of some of the basic foundational shit properly in the beginning, it's kind of like you're stacking the deck in your favor. It's not guaranteed you're not going to get sick, but if you're doing XXXXXX, likely you'll be okay. So that's how it started. I think nowadays it's very CrossFit performance oriented, but that moral philosophy continues to drive me to try to expand the brand outside of what we're already building. Like I've already connected with jiu-jitsu gyms and kickboxing gyms to start figuring out if we could do youth development, self-defense, and started talking to psychiatrists. So that way we can start talking to young kids about anxiety and how exercise can be used to moderate the anxiety of today's everyday world. So the mission is still in my heart, but the way the brand operates is more so as like a CrossFit sports organization.
I want to come back to the practical side of the think tank idea, because I really like this. I want to go on a quick tangent on, you talked about continuing education for yourself, certifications versus consults directly with the person, the expert. What has been your experience with those two approaches, and when would you recommend that a coach uses one versus the other?
Yeah, so early on, I think all I did was courses and consults. And I think at the time, it was a monetary thing, because access to people that have become high performers is hard. Mm-hmm. And it becomes expensive. Like when I was younger, I remember reaching out to Charles Poliquin because I wanted to have a conversation about BioSig. And I'd just taken the BioSig course. So I saved up like all my money. And I think the BioSig course, and I did the level 1 at the same time. Like I think I'd spent $4,000, which was like my life savings to go through this process. And I was like, hey, if I'm going to be up there, I know I'm going to have questions when we start to go into biochemistry and biology and hormones and how these things operate. I'm going to have all these things about my body that I know. I'm going to want to know how to inform my training moving forward using their methodology at a deeper level. And I remember the fee for the consultation was like $2,000 an hour. And I was like, I think it was something crazy. And I was like, all right, well, I can't afford that, so I'm not going to do it. And I think that kind of money situation drove my desire to be like, okay, well, if these experts are packaging their information so that way it can be good for their time value, that's the best way to do it. Now that I'm a little bit more financially successful and I understand that issue in reverse, like it is very costly for my schedule to give my time to somebody that just wants to ask me questions versus giving it to my business if I'm doing a content piece or if I'm on the floor training with an athlete. Like do have to kind of weigh these cost benefit things. So I'm more empathetic to it. And I've realized now that if I can, I will pay to talk to the person directly, because I find that it is in the dialogue and in the questions that once you get to a certain level of development, that's where you're getting the nuanced good information, because it's not like a rise to expertise like this where it's continue. It's kind of like a rise till you know enough shit to know you don't know, and then kind of a drop back into this humility zone with more information. And now you're just like everybody else, but you have a little bit more experience and you want to hear other people's perspectives. You want to tell them, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. How do you see it? Or what are you dealing with? And I want that back and forth. So, but I don't know if that would have been helpful for me to get at a younger age. I think you kind of got to go through the trenches for a while and build systematic ways of doing things.
And I guess you need that base of knowledge upon which you can build better questions, contextual questions that you're going to ask the person when you talk to them directly. And then you can really kind of go that 1 or 2 step farther with it.
Yeah.
Going back on the think tank, practically, how does it look with Training Think Tank? Do you guys have like a weekly get together? Do you have dedicated sessions to sharing between coaches? That's definitely something that I think we could, all benefit from more, whether you're within an organization or even independent coaches trying to set up, get-togethers, coffees, all those things. So how do you set it up, and maybe how has that part of the business or the endeavor evolved since the inception of Training Think Tank?
Yeah, so we do it differently all the time, I think, just based on busyness, time of the season. Things that we've tried that have been successful is we've had weekly staff meetings. We've had 2 times per week staff meetings where one was focused on just business development stuff and one was focused on continuing education. We've had monthly staff meetings where every month one coach was in charge of taking a continuing education concept, blowing it out and teaching it to the staff for back and forth conversation. So we've leveraged it in a lot of different ways to grow the culture. But you then start to run into these practical issues. It's like, for me, the question that I'd ask myself as a leader of this organization is me driving let's say my coaches are in the 90th percentile for knowledge and breadth of knowledge and training. Say, okay, I'm going to force everyone to come in for 1 hour a day, 2 days a week for the next 50 weeks. So we're going to spend 100 hours pushing that up to the 91st percentile. Does that have a marked increase in my overall coaching quality, business development, our ability to reach new people? And I kind of got to the point that the answer to that was no. So I started restructuring the way that we work to start putting people in teams and silos to start brainstorming in different ways about how we could solve the problems that we were dealing with from a business and culture standpoint, right? Like, how do you build a lasting culture that primarily operates with people all over the world? Or how do you build a lasting culture in a CrossFit industry that is solely focused on who's winning the CrossFit games and not some of the other nuanced things like longevity of the athlete, quality of the athlete experience, earnings potential outside of it in spite of not winning? Like, there's other variables of success that I think that we've hit. But when you're competing against those global marketplace dragons, you basically have to figure out, we got to bring our best self if we're not going to have some of those. Like, Matt Fraser's not going to be on the TTT roster. So if he's not going to be on the TTT roster, that's going to change the likelihood that we have an athlete that's going to win that helps us with our promotional quest. So we've been working on brainstorming how we work better as a unit nowadays. And I don't know if that answers your question. I feel like it's a very fluid process that we go through where I'm just constantly trying to problem solve and figure out, like, what can we do better?
Which is probably necessary given that, like you said, it's constantly evolving. And well, I guess now you do have kind of a set of constraints or problems that you have to solve and optimize for. But what came to mind when you were talking about this is that I guess maybe earlier in your career as a coach, you, not you personally, but the you for the coach, you have to look outside, you have to get all the puzzle pieces. And then at some point it turns into more of a reflective endeavor of trying to fit them or optimally fit them together. You have all the pieces, you know the stuff, you just have to, how do we put it together better in a way, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like we even from an educational standpoint, we're going back through, and like I have Google Drive folders with like book ideas that I've had, notes from courses that I've taken. I've started courses and then not finished them. And I looked through it as I was building my mentorship program, and I was like, fuck, I've done so much work on this over the last 6 years. But it's good because 6 years later, it comes back and it almost makes the creative process easier, because it's like, oh, I did all of this work, which I thought was just like bullshit of me not staying on track. But in the long run, it was actually me organizing my thoughts into a way that I could communicate it to somebody with less experience with a little bit more ease.
Do you have an easy time sitting down and going through that process? Because I have to personally, I did it recently for a friend who's running a mentorship course, and he asked me to take the conditioning module. And so I put it all down. I started from scratch. I took everything that I had, went back into my notes. Like you said, I probably have a file with your name on it somewhere in my, what was it? It was Evernote back then that I was using. So I probably have a note with all the podcast stuff that I've written down. And I thought it was a very, for me, it was a very tedious process, but it was extremely helpful and beneficial. But I think I only did it because I was forced to do it. If I hadn't had that deadline, I don't think I would have taken the hours. I probably spent, I don't know, 20 hours sitting down and rehashing all the stuff that I knew or I thought I knew and trying to organize it. How did you experience that?
Exhausting. It's like one of the worst processes ever. And part of the difficulty is like my understanding, like let's say somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, I'm coaching for 2 years and I want you to teach me what you know. It's like, okay, well, I have, say, this 12-year body of experience, and within that 12 years I've had some pretty interesting and deep experiences of like being up close and personal with some of the best coaches and the best athletes, and spending probably more time than the average bear doing things. And it's like, okay, well, I need to figure out from this like huge pile of stuff I have in my garage, what are the couple pieces that I take out and organize in a way that this person understands it, so that way they can build their own mountain. Because I know I can't give them this whole garage of information because they're not going to go through my same experience, and their business isn't going to be tied to the same athletes. And so that process is so hard for me because I don't know what to cut or who exactly to speak to. But I've enjoyed it and I think it's been valuable. It's just, I agree with you, it's tedious.
Going back to the earlier part of your life, do you find now that some of the things you've learned in business are serving you well?
Yes and no. So my education primarily got pushed towards more finance-based stuff. And I did internships on like bond trading desks and like the analytical side of things, which is kind of, even though like stocks and bonds are part of business, it's a very different part of than like running a small business and having to deal with like, how do I pay people and how do I get people in the door and how do I market? So the conceptual understanding of budgeting and money and debt and when to take debt on and how much to take debt, like how much debt I can afford to take on and still cover it. Those things were really helpful in TTT not going bankrupt in the early years. I don't think people realize like it, for me, I think it could have been easy to make money if I just wanted to be a coach and not have anybody underneath me. But if then you say, okay, well, now I'm going to start coaching, and then all of my excess money that I'm making coaching, I'm going to hire media people to start putting in media to get my information. Then I'm going to hire other coaches. And then I'm going to hire a business admin when it gets big enough. Then I'm going to pay for my legal stuff. You have to go through like years and years and years of business development that your initial popularity as a coach ever makes as much money as what you would have made if you just stayed as a one-on-one coach. Mm-hmm. So that entrepreneurial process, I feel like I was completely unprepared for. It was just like getting smashed in the face by a freaking one of those rams. Have you ever seen those ram videos of running at one another?
That's super intense. It's super intense.
Yeah, that's what my entrepreneurial experience felt like, except I was just sitting there taking it, and the entrepreneurship was the fucking ram into my head. But now that we're kind of at a little bit more of a successful level in how we've cultivated the infrastructure, now some of those ideas and concepts start to make sense. And like, they start to allow me to have conversations with potential sponsors or potential business partners that don't put me in a situation that I'm going to throw away everything I built in a stupid ass deal.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. You mentioned the media side. Was it your decision to take Chris on and start building that media arm of Training Think Tank? Was it a thought from the beginning for you?
It wasn't a thought from the beginning. I met Barbell Shrugged in the podcast that you had talked about, and I had a really good experience from the first podcast. That actually, like, that single podcast from a remote coaching inquiry standpoint to OPT was like a massive influx. People were like, what the fuck is going on over there? And they got a lot of clients from that. And it ended up being pretty positive. Mm-hmm. After that, I don't remember what the period of time was. I had went down to Wadapalooza and did a talk for something that Barbell Shrugged put on. So I got a little bit more time to spend with Mike and Doug and Chris and the other Chris, and just kind of developed more of like a little friendship, but never really thought of it as a working thing. Then when my employment with OPT ended, I was like, oh, fuck, these guys could really help me get like visibility again, because I don't have any of my own platforms. So I went on and did another podcast with them. I had kind of explained them the idea of what I wanted to do, like what type of an infrastructure I wanted to build for one-on-one coaching. And I actually tried to bring them on as business partners because I knew they were already doing group coaching. And my idea was, well, let me take over the one-on-one coaching arm of what you're doing and build it out and be partners on that. It ended up not really making sense for them. And then shortly after that, Barbell Shrugged's ownership team kind of just dissolved, and Mike McGoldrick was coming on as a coach, and he was also on the podcast. So he talked to Chris, and Chris came out for a camp. He filmed the camp, and I was just like, all right, I have some money in my budget that won't make us bankrupt. I don't know what the fuck you're going to do. At the time, I didn't have an Instagram account, and I had my Facebook account from college, but I never post on it or do anything. So I was like, I know social media is important. So like, you guys just come on and teach me how this thing works. And it's just been like a team-based process from there. I think I got really lucky on that front.
Yeah, I would say you did from the outside, considering, I guess, Chris's skill in the matter and his, I guess, his understanding of how it works and what people are looking for. Do you feel like that was maybe one of the wins on that side, where you kind of offloaded all of this, you outsourced completely the creative and the media, you just let them do their thing rather than you trying to do it?
Yeah. I mean, I never really tried to do it because I'm very obsessive about the things I like to do, and I like to do things that I'm good at. And I wouldn't be somebody that considered myself a creative or can come up with like witty captions, and like the things that drive social media are not necessarily the strength attributes of Max as the person. So I never really thought I was going to take it over. And then when you get somebody that you vibe with personally, that's good at it, that wants to take it over, it's almost like, oh, this is a no-brainer, right? Like, of course I'm going to give this to you to do it. And I think it was a hugely lucky thing. And it's something that I keep trying to do, because I keep identifying things like, I'm not really that good at this, but I'm still doing it for the business. How can I stop doing it and find somebody that is good at doing it? And like, we're working on organizational restructure. That's another thing that I'm like, I'm disorganized because I'm doing a million things. Like, I'm golfing, I'm CrossFitting, I'm doing kickboxing, I'm doing jujitsu. Like, I can't even find my shoes half the days. How am I going to make sure all of our meetings run on time?
Have there been any significant challenges that have come with the media side of Training Think Tank? Well, I mean, if we maybe talk first about what it has brought to Training Think Tank and the company as a whole to be so, let's say, serious about discipline about developing the content side, and then if there have been any challenges linked to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the upside, I think, is just visibility. We have our community of people that we coach can connect with us in a way that they couldn't before. Like, when you're one-on-one coaching people, a lot of times, like, you have a call with them every 4 or 6 weeks, or I've coached some people for like 10 years and we talk like every 3 or 4 months. So like, there's a lot of disconnection that can happen, but they can stay connected by watching throwdowns and podcasts and being involved in what we're doing and what our athletes are doing. So it's been good for community development. It's been good for building an athlete funnel. It's been good for actually making connections with athletes and coaches outside of our organization. Like, I know it's happening. It doesn't bother me that it's happening, but I've seen things that we've done with our programs that then 2 or 3 cycles later, other programs start to embed into their programs, or other people start to mimic the content the way that it goes out. And to me, I'm like, well, that's just a form of giving me more positive reinforcement that we're on the right track.
You were there first.
If there's a sense of mimicry, even if you're getting more viewership because you potentially have a bigger star on there, the consistency of the application of the creative process of being an innovator in the space will pay off at a bigger level. It just might take a longer time to do it. So that could be a downside, but I've flipped it in my head to make it feel like a win. The downsides to it is it's just hard. Making media is really challenging. So like trying to figure out what an audience likes. I think for me, I can tend to talk really quickly and go down deep rabbit holes of situations that sometimes an audience, it might not be right for. Like if I start talking really deep about training and it was supposed to be for an athlete, sometimes I'm like, oh shit, like I lost them. So it's been a process for me of feeling very insecure and trying to figure out how to get better at the skill. And trying to figure out too, like, what's the balance of using that as our marker for success and just using it as a tool to continue to be successful? Because chasing 100,000 followers or whatever, like if you hit those targets, people start to pay attention to you. Sponsors want to be involved with you. But half the time I'm like, well, fuck that. I want sponsors that believe in what we do as a coaching organization and believe in our mission and don't just want to rub elbows with us because we're the cool kids in town. But I know that's not how that world works. That world works on like a purely algorithmic numbers-based thing. It's like, oh, you got 2 million followers, I want to work with you. So that's been the challenge for me, is trying to figure out what's the moral application of this. How much work should we put into doing it? Should we be growing it, or should we be adding value? Should it be a marketing funnel for products, or should it be a way for us to connect with our community? And I don't have answers to it. So
probably all of the above in a certain proportion or another. And I guess depending on the time as well.
Yeah.
Do you, or does your team come up with ideas for content? Do you use a lot of kind of questions that people ask you through media to generate content from it? How do you guys work?
Yeah, all the above. I think like popular things that are happening in the market, questions that we get from our athletes, questions that we get in the training programs, like in TTT Compete, TTT Fitness. People ask why we do certain things commonly. People that are on staff going and doing their own research and just being like, Mike did research on cramping, for example, because he's a heavy cramper, and then he made a cramping course that he put in the classroom. So it kind of becomes like we're trying to be efficient with the process of, we all want to get better as coaches. We're all researching and stuff. So, okay, well, if you do it, try to figure out how we also then make content out of it and how we put it into some sort of a paid product. So that way it's integrated and we're not doing it in like I learn over here, I make content over here, and I create education over here. And it's this like complicated system that doesn't work together.
What's the flavor of the day in terms of the type of questions that you get the most of maybe the last few weeks or the last few months? Is there a trend or a topic or certain topics that pop up more than others?
I feel like for the last year, people, and talking about questions to me specifically, I think the biggest questions that I get are about like the training camps. Like, what do you think about what Mayhem's doing over here? What do you think about what Proven is doing? Or what do you think about Matt Frazier taking over as hard work pays off? Or, Katrin leaving Comp Train and going to, I think it's because I coach higher profile people, I think then people assume that I'm like embedded into the gossip structure of the higher level coaches of the industry. So that's the common question, but I don't think I'll ever make content on that. Like, I think all that would do would potentially create such unnecessary conflict for no reason. Because I don't know what they're doing, you know?
Yeah, it's Max's hot take. You should Chris should make a segment of that.
Yeah. We've thought about doing Max's rant, because sometimes I get these ideas and I'm like, I feel like I should just go on and like pretend that I'm angry and really ragefully like shit on somebody that's super popular in the market and just see what happens. And then if it goes bad, just send them a message like, hey, this was a joke. I'm sorry, I'm pulling it down. Like, just turn myself into a heel like the WWE.
Yeah, I don't know how long that would last, and it would probably contrast quite a bit with the quality and the nature of the content you guys have been publishing.
Yeah, it would be the last 10 years of trying to build public respect would be eroded, but I'd have a couple laughs along the way.
Exactly. At least you would have that. If we shift a little bit to the competitive CrossFit space, what would you say have been the main changes to the competitive side of CrossFit since you first got involved more than 10 years ago?
Well, should we talk about Dave Castro leaving it? Because I feel like
if you want to, it's the end of an era, if nothing else.
Yeah. Biggest changes. So females have gotten way stronger. Mm-hmm. I think that would be number one. I feel like, we did a throwdown of 13.1 and we are rebooting it as part of our throwdown. And we've basically made the female weights the same percentages that they would have been in today's world. And looking at them, I was like, wow, they really made the weights super light in 2013. And now they're heavy as shit if you make them like that workout changes completely. Yeah. And girls would still be finishing it. Like, so the rate of progression of the females with the barbell has been insane. The total volume of just general CrossFit stuff that people could handle in a week, like, if just say like, this is hard to quantify, especially because people do different programs and then there's off seasons and accessory work. But if you just said, hey, I'm going to add up the number of muscle ups, handstand walks, snatches, legless rope climbs, it's like up pegboards, all of the ballistic upper body things. And you said, I'm going to add this up and just take a weekly tally. Mm-hmm. There would be people, especially in their like late teens, early 20s, that are accumulating, I would say, like double what the elite athletes from 10 years ago would do in their peak cycles. And they do that all the time, like 24/7. That's just their natural way of being. They're like, do a rope climb before they go eat grapes for breakfast type stuff. So it's been an interesting evolution in the professionalism of it. Like, that top sphere is like, they're doing it as a full-time job now. And as a full-time job, the level of fitness and endurance and subset of skills is just so high.
Would you say that, And I guess maybe the constantly varied nature of the sport maybe is one of the dampers on this, but would you say that total volume is one of the main goals for high level athletes with what they're presented with at the games and other big competitions, multi-day competitions?
Yeah, this one's a hard thing to answer because I generally coach the person. And so let's say the person comes to me and they're like, hey, I finished 15th at the semifinal. I really want to make it to the CrossFit Games. Like that's my number one goal. The training program for that person, even though the fitness gap between them and a world-class CrossFitter is only like 1% maybe on all things, their training programs look entirely different. The level of volume is lower. They're preparing for a semifinal style event, will generally reduce swimming and externally loaded running for super long distances, because you have to play some sort of statistical game to say like, all right, well, if you want to be top 5 and these are kind of what the tests have been at this level, then you got to be really fucking good at these tests. And if you spend 20% of your training time getting ready for the tests that happen after this stage and you don't make it, you wasted a fifth of your year. So the training program for somebody at that kind of bubble level is different than somebody that's kind of like Travis. Or Noah, or somebody that's been a consistent player at that level. If somebody is a consistent player at that level, I wouldn't say volume is the goal. I wouldn't even say volume is necessary to do in the buildup at a super higher level to get ready. But I would say that you're never going to be successful if you're not accustomed to handling the volume, because there's just so many contractions on the body and the volume of cardiac output over that 4 days and the amount of food that you have to get in. And I think if people have done it in their earlier years, maybe as an older athlete, they can do it on less volume. If people are younger, they can probably do it all season leading into it. So it's definitely one of the variables, but I think that a lot of the CrossFit market is like dick measuring their volume. It's like, oh yeah, like I can handle more. I'm like, yeah, but does that actually make you better or not?
It makes me think of Froning's video from way back where I forget if it was the CrossFit Journal or something like this, and it was like he was doing 6 a days or something like that.
Yeah, and it's ironic. I was thinking like, okay, that's beneficial for him based on what the testing bodies were in the years that he was winning. But if the testing body had been being created by somebody else that didn't really value the ability to endure and be successful on Sunday, then he might not have been a 4-time individual champion. And then the volume-based approach wouldn't have got popularized. So like, it's amazing how public opinion can shift so much by a influential person not winning by accident, because he won because he was really fucking good, but winning by his circumstances lining up perfectly with what Dave Castro thought was optimal testing for fitness. And he wins. And then basically he has the golden goose egg to share with everybody. And then everyone's doing high volume, in spite of the fact that like probably 80% of the people that try to jump on those high volume programs would be better off if they went lower volume, higher skill, lower intensity, more strength work, and just like trained like normal people.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Talking about Dave Castro, can you talk to his skill over the years as someone who programs for the games and the way that he crafted we call them workouts, but I guess tests is a term that is maybe more appropriate. Can you talk to that, and maybe from your perspective, since you do this day in and day out, and you can probably have a much more detailed view of those tests and the underlying demands on the body than anybody else. How have those tests by Dave evolved over the years, and again, talk to his skill in that matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to talk to the skill because I don't know what successful programming is, because the way he's looking at it, he's saying, it's got to be, you have to look at it from the context of the Open, 2 quarterfinals, 2 semifinals, to the games. So if you try to pick apart one specific thing or one specific event, and then they can tie back to another event that led into it, it can make it really hard to make like a logical argument against like, hey, I don't think this is right in its entirety. So there's that component that makes it difficult to answer. There's the component that he's also making a spectacle. So like, you know, you've seen sports like grid come up, or, you know, I think OPEX and James, like it started, I was part of and spoke at the Optathlon in 2011 or 2012. And James was essentially trying to create like,
I remember that.
yeah, like it was really like
A somewhat standardized version. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think the FFP or the Functional Fitness Federation kind of done something like that, but it's shown over time that it's boring and it's not getting a lot of people to watch it and no one gives a shit.
Mhm.
And so if we know that, we're like, okay, well, the spectacle is part of the game. And if that's part of the game, I would have to say Dave Castro's done a pretty good job because he's created himself as a massive public figure. And a lot of the events that have happened at the CrossFit Games have been pretty fucking cool to watch. There have been some specifically where I feel like they really dropped the ball and that having some foresight or better testing could have potentially avoided. But all in all, over the decade of doing it, knowing how hard it is to run events and knowing that most of the people supporting it are volunteers, I would say they're very successful on that front. Yeah. And then the third point is, how much would I compare CrossFit's ideology of fitness? So the like, you know, the 3 general energy systems that they lay out, the Hopper model, and the constantly varied functional movements performed at high intensity, and that being a reflection of what fitness is. How well does the CrossFit Games test that ideology? I would say pretty poorly. But again, that doesn't mean that it's a low skilled, it doesn't mean that he has low skill with programming. It means that he's probably programming with a different bias, which is like creating a show, creating a spectacle, growing a sport. And for me, I am programming to help people get better at absorbing and performing in a crazy, unknown, chaotic test that really has very limited scientific and supported structure that goes behind it. So we have 2 different programming philosophies because we've been playing cat and mouse for the last 10 years. You know, he's been the cat and I've been running away trying not to get fucking swiped by the variants.
What is there a year that stands out for you as a maybe a transition point or a year that was really well crafted from your perspective, or just really challenging tests that took the whole kind of CrossFit world by surprise maybe?
So what I would say is if you went through the last decade of all CrossFit tests from the open to the games, I think that in there you could find a quality test that would test all things that they believe are part of CrossFit. But there are certain years that omit entire categories. And there are certain years that have like 6 or 7 tests that are all the same things. And to me, I don't like that. I'm like, all right, well, if you're defining fitness and you want to test for fitness, it doesn't need to be the same tests all the time, but there could be silos or there could be styles, or you could guarantee that, you know, for example, if you say you want to test the 4-minute time domain and you also want to test a 1 rep max, well, doing a 1 rep max snatch and then doing a 5 rounds per time running workout where you run around something and clean a bar that's 85, 90, 92, 94, and 97% of people's 1 rep max, you're not really testing the 4-minute time domain. You're doing some sort of 1 rep max test with a little bit of like fatigue built into it, right? So it's like, okay, well, are we okay with that? Or should we just say like, we have a strength test, we have a cool strength endurance test, but then we also have a 4-minute test where people can just fucking drop the hammer and move at speed. And if you have some sort of guidelines like that, I think you can have predictability and repeatability, and athletes would be getting there more regularly instead of just saying like, hey, my most genius level athletes, my Matt Frazier's, my Tia Toomey's, my Rich Fronings, they win all the time, so the testing is perfect. I'm like, no. They win all the time because they are freakish. It can't be a validation that the underlying testing body therefore is perfect.
What do you think is to come with this big transition that just happened? Do you think it's going to move towards more standardization without being obviously fully standardized? Like you said, it doesn't seem to work in that world. But what are your thoughts on what might come out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to really make predictions because I don't know, and I'm part of some inner circles at the big world of CrossFit, but not like the inner circle that's making decisions at CrossFit. My guess would be that they will get a group of people to help with that. And I'm sure it will include some ex-athletes, some affiliate owners. I don't know. I mean, I do know for sure that there are some current athletes that are currently competing that have the ear of Rosa that are talking about things like that. And like, I get it because our culture is so small, but there's also a massive conflict of interest if somebody is like an athlete that's literally at the top of the sport right now that's making decisions about the direction of the long-term sport. But I put myself in that category too. It's like, well, I have a bias, right? So I don't see any way around other than at some point them creating a proper infrastructure for taking feedback from anybody that's been a judge for multiple years at the highest level in the sport to be able to talk about athlete fairness and what's potentially going on from a cheating perspective. I think you need to have coaches because coaches are going to be able to tell you better, like, what type of athletes are successful in these type of tests, what type of volume can they handle. If you're going to test in this type of a volume on this type of a movement, should you give them some sort of like 3-week notice on this movement so that way they don't show up and look like shit? Because like there are things like that that I think coaches could, even if I'm not trying to help my athletes win, I could just tell them like, hey, if you run a marathon and people are averaging 10K of running every other week for 6 weeks leading into the games, by the time you get to the end of the games, you're probably going to have people weak as shit. Like it is what it is. Maybe a couple of your outliers will be all right, but these people's bodies aren't built for that because the testing has so much strength work and so much hypertrophy built into it. So I think coaches should be part of the dialogue. I'm biased in that. And I also know that coaches at that level have probably gotten the least respect. It's mostly like you get to the games and it's like, you know, hey, make sure you stay in your corner, in your box. You're not allowed to be at the briefings. So I don't envision that that'll happen. So I think it'll really end up being affiliate owners and ex-athletes that dictate the future of where we go. But I'm hopeful that, you know, I'm hopeful that the sport will grow. I don't necessarily know if that means it's the CrossFit Games, because if the CrossFit Games doesn't do it right, I think you already have people in places, Rogue Invitational, Wadapalooza, Dubai Fitness Championships. I'm sure there's stuff in Australia, Irish Throwdown. Like there are things developing now that are going to be able to stand on their own. And if they potentially got the right people and the right athletes and the right support and the right visibility, I think could start to create a more competitive infrastructure where it's not like, hey, everybody is leeching off of CrossFit Games. It's like, all right, well now CrossFit Games is just one of the players, right? Like even Rogue's prize purse is bigger than the games now. And people used to say like, well, we're training for the games. And I'm like, all right, well now, like maybe that's going to change in just 1 year of having a prize purse that's big enough.
Yeah, which is interesting, and but it also shows how the whole, I guess, CrossFit ecosystem has been growing, and not unidimensionally with the CrossFit Games, but there are those other players that are really, you know, like you said, taken on by themselves. Just to go back on one last thing, something you talked about, and not as a finger pointing, nagging kind of thing, but more around constructive criticism, so it doesn't happen again. You talked about a few workouts where they had dropped the ball in the games over the years. Could you say which ones and why?
Well, I'll just off the top of my head, I'll remember this year. They did the run clean ladder and almost every athlete got capped. I think one person in the male side finished and another on the female side finished. And then the next workout was supposed to be a heavier variation with the same run. And it was only going to be a 1 minute cap ahead. So we saw the workouts and I just went through and I just kind of like mapped out some time. Like we don't know exactly how long it is, but we're trying to come up with strategy like on the fly because they don't give you a lot of time. It's like, here's the workout. You know, if you're in the first heat, you got 10 minutes to warm up and you got to figure out how to put an athlete in the mindset that they're about to tack this random shit that they've never seen before as well as possible. So I'm doing like some calculations saying like, okay, well, if this is somewhere between 150 and 250, and then they're at a jog pace. So they're running an 8-minute mile. This is about when they're going to get to the lift, adding a little bit of time for each one of the runs. And I remember looking at Travis and being like, I think this time cap's going to be pretty tight. I don't know what the fuck, how is this next workout a 1 minute increase in time cap? Nobody is going to finish. And like, this was me getting 3 minutes of information versus like, I'm assuming they have a whole team plan these out. They have athletes test them. They have a demo team flying out there. So they do the first thing and then they shorten the run substantially in the next thing. So it's basically like a 75-meter run and change the whole workout.
Yeah.
To me, I'd be like, it'd be like showing up at the NBA, like they play the first half and be like, oh shit, we set the nets at 11 feet. Let's go lower them a foot. Like, I know that mistakes can happen, but those types of magnitude mistakes, if you want, like, I think if you have the 40 best athletes in the world and you set a time cap, it should be such that 90% of the field is getting through the time cap and the other people are like injured or a major weakness got exposed. So that's one example. Another example was the 3-2-2-2 intervals this year. Tia almost finished carrying the yoke in the first interval this time. So she sprinted all the way down and was like this far away. And BKG, I think, was pretty close as well. So most people ended up finishing in 2 intervals and some people went into the 3 and the 4. And again, it's like, what are we trying to get out of that? Are we trying to set up so it's possible somebody finishes in the first heat if they sprint, or are we trying to have some strategy in terms of like how they're chipping the workout up? Or is it supposed to be like, hey, we don't want to know, we don't want to test it, we just see what happens? Maybe like it's almost like a chaos type thing. Personally, I think that is a test that could be refined and built with a more clear understanding of what you're trying to test. Because if you're trying to test it where sprint speed and picking up a yoke and getting to full speed and finishing in the first interval is possible, I almost feel like it'd be better to tell everyone that. So that way everybody sprints, and then sprinting endurance in the second one would actually be like, okay, well now you're fucked up because you didn't pace it. So those are just 2 little things. They're not criticisms like I can guarantee I do it better, but they're things that I think if you have an entire development team and an entire demo team, and you're trying to create the most comprehensive and professional test of fitness that are out there, those are just 2 things that pop up in my head that I'm like, that might not be as professional as it should be.
That makes sense. I have one last question for you, Max.
You just put me on a burn list. People are going to be like, fuck this guy.
Nah, I think we were pretty clear about it being an attempt at constructive criticism rather than just a finger pointing game. Last question, Max. What do you think we need to focus on, whether it's conversations, efforts, actions, to try and keep CrossFit growing in the right direction as a sport in the years to come?
Ooh. When you say we, do you mean me and you specifically, or you mean like culturally?
Culturally, and that by extension, me and you, or integration, you and I as well.
Yeah, man, that's a really good question. I'm not sure. So some of the things that pop to my mind are that I think that we need to create a better fan experience for people that don't know CrossFit. You know, I think even little things like, for years, I've been advocating that at the CrossFit Games, there is one panoramic view of all of the athletes on the field all the time. And if you think like, okay, we understand you got to make a superstar and Matt's a superstar, but also the person in lane 7, 8, 9, and 10 and 1, 2, and 3 has 50 people at their house that love them, that have supported them to get there, that if they were on the TV would be watching it. So you're like throwing away viewership in that capacity. I think that ensuring that some of the longer events, like the kayak stuff, showing that live and not having like buoys marking where people are and showing time and all that stuff. Like, I feel like triathlon does that right, where they get the pre-footage, and then because it's such a long event, they chop in some human interest stories. And
Right.
I think we need to think about that. Now, I'm the last person in the world to tell you how to do it because I coach, but I do know that everybody that I know that's outside of the world of CrossFit is like, why the fuck do you want to watch people doing shit you can go to LA Fitness and watch? I'm like, you don't get it, but you would get it if you did it. So I think that's one. I think a professional infrastructure that allows people to compete at all levels. So I think teen development things, I think age group developmental things, I think off-season competitions for people who are at that RX level, some sort of an understanding of what those competitions could look like so people could do them with more frequency. Like if you're showing up to a competition, it ends up being like the CrossFit Games, you can do 1 or 2 of those a year. But if you show up and it's like, hey, this is a 3-day event, and then at the end of the event, we're going to have 3 celebrities take you through some, some sample workouts and some sample skill sessions. People could do that way more regularly. And I think it would boost the amount of people that were interested in the sport. And I think we need that. I think we need more athletes participating and not just more advocates of the sport that are already at the top of the sport, because of course they're going to advocate for better athlete pay and like all the things that they're going to advocate for.
What about at the community level? If you're speaking to coaches that are listening that maybe look up to you or follow you, and that are, in CrossFit and they want to do good, they want to push it in the right direction, what would be your advice to them?
Well, so the direction that I would give would be how I'm trying to run my business is building a culture where this is something that's adding meaning to the people's lives that are going through the struggle of trying to be a CrossFitter. And I think that if you look at like some of the bigger names of CrossFit right now, the bigger programs, like Proven is built on winning. Like in the name, it's built on winning. Mayhem is built on winning, and it's built on having multiple gold medals. Hard work pays off is built on winning. And winning is a really important thing. But if we really boil it down to the subset of humanity that is out there, that is eventually going to be a CrossFitter, you're talking about like 1 in a billion people are going to be that person that wins. So stand for something more than that with your athletes. Help them with longevity. Help them craft ways that the things they're learning in the sport are helping them for their life outside of it. And I've unfortunately seen so many people that get into CrossFit and they get obsessive and they train like the people that they look up to who are winning and everything, but without all the resources. And then they literally end up broken. And I don't mean just physically broken, like joints and stuff, but also emotionally. They don't know how to train outside of hard metcons. They don't know how to have fun with training. They don't know how to deal with competitive anxiety because they're so sick of losing and their self-esteem has been so tied to the leaderboard for so long. And to me, that is running contrary to what we should do with competition. Competition should be an avenue for people to find their best selves. And the fucking champions are going to be the champions because they're champions. They have the right attitude. They are willing to be disciplined. They can deal with the monotony. They have a great support structure. Now, so you need that in whatever coaching community that you choose. But outside of that, the winning is never going to define a person's happiness for life. And that's been proven over and over and over again. So for me, I think make this about something deeper. And for me, like that thing's going to be different for other people, but that'd be my recommendation if people are building a coaching culture, is that they're helping people fall in love with the process, the struggle themselves, the learning. And it's not necessarily only about winning, even if the winning is just like a nice cherry on top of the cake to validate the work.
That was a good way to wrap it up, man. Where can people find out more about you and Training Think Tank?
Instagram is Training Think Tank. I have my own Instagram, which is Max El-Hag, just MAXELHAG, which I don't put as much stuff on. TrainingThinkTank.com website that pretty much has all the info that you would need for coaching, training programs, educational stuff. Just pretty much everything that we do is on there.
Well, links will be in the show notes, and thanks to you, Max, for coming on.
Thank you, my man.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you would like to support the podcast, please take a few moments to leave a written review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. If you want to watch this episode again, you can find the full video recording on my YouTube channel. You'll also find hundreds of hours of free content, all my podcasts, my thoughts of the day, structured presentations, and more. So don't wait, go subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.